Chapter 9. As Ramar and the shepherd walked through the hillsides of the world in between, a host of creatures gathered behind them. There were giraffes and fireflies and reptiles and eagles, every creature ever created. Those who were weak were helped by those who were strong, and those who could not see were led by those who could. And those who were few became a crowd, and the crowd became a throng, and yet they were hushed and still. No creature spoke or sang its song. Finally, from the crest of a sunlit hill, Ramar could see his old friends waiting for his arrival. Lydia was there, as poised and regal as ever, and Dove flew around her head in such perfect circles they seemed like a giant halo for one who was holy. Leonardo was with them too, his pale wings spread above like sails of a ship on a sea of green. They were beautiful to see, and they filled a spot in Ramar's heart that had felt empty since he had left them. He trembled with joy and called out their names as he ran towards them. "Lydia! Dove!" he shouted, and they turned their heads to see him, and their eyes lit up with love. "I have come home again," called Ramar, and he ran so fast that his rainbow wings lifted him gently into the air, and he soared above everyone's head for more than a moment, even higher than Dove and Leonardo, and then he set himself down in front of Lydia. "Oh, how we've missed you," said Lydia. "It's so good to have you back again." "Yes, and I have found a new friend," said Ramar. "He's a sheep who is also a shepherd." "We have learned of the shepherd," Lydia told him, "for he is known throughout all the worlds of all the universes and through all the dimensions of space and time. He has been many times a prophet and a shepherd to us all." It was at that moment, well behind Ramar, that the lamb arrived, and Dove, Lydia, and Leonardo could only gaze at him and feel the wonder of what he was. No one spoke, not the shepherd, not Ramar, not anyone. There was too much feeling between them to let words interrupt, at least for a moment. Finally, Ramar broke his news to Lydia. "I am soon to be born," he told her, "and the shepherd has said that he will be with me, and he will help guide me through all the days that I live on earth." "And what will you do with those days?" asked Lydia. Ramar answered in an instant. "I will be a teacher," he told her, "and I will share the lessons of my wings with all who wish to hear them." "And what are the lessons?" asked Leonardo, as he and Dove and Lydia moved closer to hear, as did all the creatures who had gathered about them. Ramar could not answer right away because what he had learned was hard to put into words. He had felt the lessons were not so much for saying aloud or writing down as they were for feeling. Once you sensed them and held them in your heart, you would know the meanings, and the meanings would change you forever. Teachers do not teach that way. Ramar was sure of that, nor students listen. He spoke to Leonardo. "I will tell those who hear me that we cannot love each other unless we first love ourselves, and we cannot judge one another unless we are willing to be judged as well. Nor can we do harm to others without harming ourselves, or think for another, or choose for another, or force anyone else to think and live as we do." "But what if all you bring to the world is truth?" asked Leonardo. "Should those around you not listen to what you tell them? And if they don't, should you not force them?" "Wisdom cannot be given to those who don't want it," Ramar replied. "It can only be received, and those who receive it must choose first to hear it. There is no other way." Leonardo smiled in admiration. "You have become most wise, my precious friend," he said. "Is that what the shepherd has taught you?" Ramar smiled in return. "Yes," he answered. "I have learned from the shepherd, as I have learned from you and every creature I have met." Then what will you say when they ask you about what God is? Asked Leonardo. Have we taught you that? I will say that God is everything that is, and we are all a part of him, just as the leaves of an oak are a part of the tree, neither separate from it or one another. Lydia interrupted. That's a very hard lesson to learn, she said, and few will believe it. Perhaps not a soul in all the world. But Ramar believed it, and he had seen a pig with a light in his foot, and he knew the light was God. But we each have a light within us, he said, looking up to the shepherd. I'm sure that is true. And the shepherd agreed that it was. It is no bigger than a splinter, he said, speaking to the crowd now gathered about them. But that is big enough, for the splinter is God. He beckoned to the dove, who rhymed with love. We must have faith in ourselves, he said, and know that God is within each of us, every one, even the most humble of creatures, and the least of mankind. And in those times when it seems that the splinter is gone and hidden from our eyes, we must still believe it is there, as fully and faithfully as Dove believes he will one day grow teeth. Dove blushed as the shepherd spoke. He was not used to such attention, certainly not from one so revered as the sheep, who was also a shepherd. If he could smile, he would have smiled, but of course he could not, at least not yet. Ramar had listened intently to each word the shepherd said, for it seemed that his own heart was speaking instead of the lamb. He could not explain it or understand it. He knew only that the wisdom of the shepherd lived in his own heart as well, and that he would one day share it with all who would listen. The shepherd got up from the place where he sat and stood beside Ramar. I think it is time to go, if you think you are ready. I am ready, said Ramar, and as he answered, there was a glow around his wings, and each bright color shimmered with the warm light. Suddenly he knew the meaning of his wings and why they were his. He looked to the shepherd, and the shepherd knew as well. Truth gives you wings to oneness with God, he said to Ramar, and there was a grace in his voice that removed any doubt. Ramar was certain now of every lesson he had learned. His only question is how he could remember them all when he was no longer a rabbit with rainbow wings. Do people remember what they have learned in the world in between, he asked, and the shepherd told him they sometimes do. You will not remember everything at first, he said, but little by little, as you live as a person, it will all come back to you, each color, each lesson, each reason for being. Ramar was satisfied with that. He was ready to be born. He would hold the lessons in his heart the best he could, knowing that he was not alone. But how could he say goodbye, he wondered. What would life be without Lydia and Dove and Leonardo? They were as dear to him as life itself. And knowing this, he looked at them lovingly, one at a time, etching their faces into their mind and memory so he would never forget them. Lydia felt a sadness too, for she had come to love Ramar with all her heart, and he could see it in her eyes as he searched her face for something he might have missed. And Dove, sensing the moments to come, looked away when Ramar came near so he would not see his tears. Dove had faith in the future and what was to be, but today all he could feel was the pain of parting. Ramar would soon be gone. And finally, there was Leonardo, who for once said nothing, because he knew his voice would give away his feelings should he try and speak. His wisdom was one thing, but his love was quite another, too deep for goodbyes. Is this what death is like? Ramar asked them, and Lydia found the words to answer. A little, she told him. It is always sad to leave the ones you love, even when you know the parting is not forever. Only life is forever, reminded Leonardo, and death is just for a moment. That is something to remember always. Ramar was satisfied with the truth of that, but not entirely, and tears rolled down his cheeks as one at a time he kissed his friends goodbye. Beautiful Lydia, faithful dove, thoughtful Leonardo, I will see you again, he said, even before you know it. And with that, the rest of us gazed in silence. Ramar glanced lovingly at the shepherd for one last time, and then rose through the clouds on his rainbow wings until he was out of sight. Then, in the darkness, while all of us still watched our goodbyes, there came a light from above our heads. It was small at first, and only a few took notice, but then, as it dipped and looped and circled above the crowd, it grew brighter and brighter until it shone on everyone, every face reflected in its glow, and every soul its glory. It was the gleam from Dove's new teeth.